Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another review video here on the channel. This is another rapid fire review, which is where I try and review a new release within 24 hours of finishing it so that I don't develop an enormous backlog of books. Today we are talking about Ithaca by Claire North. I'm going to check when it's out though, because I don't remember. This was sent to me by the lovely people at Orbit. Nobody's paying me to talk about books. All opinions are my own, but I was sent this for free and it's out on the 6th of September. So hopefully it won't be too long after that. I just need to edit this video. It's currently the 5th of September when I'm filming this, and I finished this yesterday, so we're speeding through. I said that nobody's paying me to talk about books, but what I do want to clarify is that a lot of the reasons that I have feelings about this book are very, very personal. So if you love this book to pieces, if you want to praise it and say there's nothing wrong with it ever, completely respect that. I'm talking very much from personal experience here. Please don't yell at me. Please. I'm going to keep this as spoiler-free as humanly possible. If you do want to go in knowing absolutely nothing, click away now. And as with most Greek mythology retellings, there are a few content warnings you might want to bear in mind, so I will link the story graph for the book so you can check those out if you wish. I did all of that in a really weird order, and now I don't really know what I'm doing. Claire North is, I believe, a pseudonym, but I never know whether to talk about who the pseudonyms are, but if it says who it's a pseudonym of in the back of the book, it's probably fine. It's a pseudonym for Catherine Webb. There we go. Has written a bunch of stuff. I don't think I've read any of it. I've possibly read a different series, maybe read the first one, I can't quite remember, but I've had notes from a burning age. Notes of a burning age? Notes from the burning age. Definite articles are hard. I've had that vaguely on my radar for quite some time and I would quite like to get to it. I'm not going to do what I did in Magic Steeped in Poison and not have this behind me the whole time. There we go. Claire North, written an awful lot of things. This is the latest. I feel like I don't need to explain the kind of book this is. There are a lot of them at the moment. I've definitely seen an Ariadne. I've definitely seen, I think, an Electra. A lot of Greek mythology retellings specifically focusing on women. I should love this. I ought to love this. Very recently I reviewed Circe and I did love it, so I do have the potential to love a Greek mythology retelling of this kind. But let's talk about it a bit more. This is specifically about Ithaca and is being marketed as being very specifically about Penelope of Ithaca, and we have a book that is narrated by the goddess Hera, who, as you will know, is the goddess of, and I should know this, I was an ancient historian, but like, motherhood, family, women? I'm gonna put up something on screen that says exactly what she's meant to be in the domain of. But yes, narrated by Hera, which is unusual. Often Hera is the villain of the story, or at least a less than positive character, so it was very interesting having a story from her perspective. I'll come on to that more. And yes, we follow Penelope. It's been 17 years since Odysseus sailed off to Troy, and there are suitors in Ithaca, and there are also pirates raiding, and there's a lot going on, and she's just trying to rule, but not rule too much because she doesn't want bad things to happen to her like they have happened to other people. And it's all very messy, and the book kind of chronicles this actually quite short period of time in quite a tumultuous time for Ithaca, the island. First question, possibly the most important one, do you need to have a working understanding of the Odyssey? Do you need to understand the story of Penelope, Ithaca, Clytemnestra, the whole thing? Do you need to know it? I think yes. And I've said this with a few other things. I think that you don't necessarily have to. You might enjoy the story without. I'd be really interested if you're a person who has absolutely no context for any Homeric poetry, whether you enjoyed this. Was it weird? I'd really love to know, but I can only speak to it as someone who has a pretty decent understanding, though I can never remember little details. That's better, isn't it? I think knowing those things gives you a more enjoyable experience because you can appreciate the story more as a retelling or a reimagining more than as a story on its own. Obviously, in this case, Claire North's filling in a bit of the story that really we don't focus on, and Hera, our narrator, is quite adamant that we probably should have done, or maybe potentially things got written out of stories that shouldn't have been. So I don't think it's essential for you to understand like the scope of the story, but I think you will get more out of it if you have a bit of an understanding. Just look something up. There's some really lovely versions of the story out there. You don't need to read the original. It's all good. I think if you brushed up on just Odysseus, just like where he comes from and why he's gone, so like the concept of the Trojan War, and then maybe a vague understanding of like who are the big players in the game of the Trojan War, that'd cover your bases. So yes, what did I like about this? I liked a lot of things, I think. It's hard to say. I have mixed feelings. We'll try and talk about it in a coherent enough way because I do need to go back to work quite soon. I enjoyed the writing. I didn't think I was going to. Right early on, I was kind of annoyed. I think it's second person... no. It's third person present, and that's not always my favourite thing. I don't really love books set in the present tense, but I understood why. And it's quite poetic. And I talked about that in Circe, I think, and possibly also in my Song of Achilles review, that there is this sense of sometimes that's a little bit annoying and sometimes that's enjoyable. I think it made it harder to get into this book, and I found it less accessible than Madeline Miller's writing has been. And not to compare authors to each other, but like, isn't that what we're here to do? So yes, I found it less accessible, but overall I didn't find it super annoying. And I think if you're here for that kind of poetical prose, it will work for you. I think if that's a massive no, then this isn't going to be a book that switches you around. I'm a person where I can sit on the fence. Sometimes I love it, sometimes I dislike it. I think the latter half of the book, I really enjoyed it. The beginning half of the book, I didn't so much. Not for me. Character-wise, I found it very interesting, and it's something that I need to ponder more, probably, but that's not the concept of these quick reviews. I found it very interesting, the players that Claire North sets up as kind of our antagonists and protagonists, and how that works. Because obviously this is written in support of Penelope. It's a very pro-Penelope book, which is not something we've not encountered before. Not miraculous. Penelope's a very good character. We like her. But it was really interesting, I think, setting Hera up as your narrator, and her relationship with other gods and goddesses was very interesting. And I think that the way that this book writes relationships between women was really fascinating, and I talked about that a little bit in my Magic Steeped in Poison review. Not to plug my own reviews too much, but this idea of female friendship I actually find very important in books, and it was interesting that there isn't a lack of it in this book. I thought there would be more, just because of how the story's set up with focusing on the women of Ithaca. Most importantly, I think this isn't going to be a spoiler, but like the relationship between Hera and Athena, and Athena so often being painted as like an absolute hero, warrior, lady, we love her, she's the best, and also the goddess of intelligence. And I think that this book was really interesting for sort of the way it depicts Athena as ignoring women, and particularly mothers. I found like a very interesting perspective, not one that I enjoyed, and I think I found it quite difficult to engage with because I really liked Athena as a character. I was like fully Annabeth Chase fan when I was reading the Percy Jackson books, like that was my jam, and it's really fascinating to put her not as the best. And she's not awful in this, but she's not the best, and she's very, very focused on Odysseus, and she kind of plays that role of bringing all the focus to him when Hera wants it to be on the queens of Greece. My basic point is I don't think it was comfortable to read. I don't think it was bad to read, but I found it very interesting. And that's, in some ways, that's why I liked this book, is it challenged a lot of my thoughts around things and brought new ideas in. And that is a good thing. Doesn't mean I'm going to enjoy it and want to pick it up again, but it was good to explore that and to kind of put different gods in different positions, because so often Hera is the worst. And it was really interesting to read a book where she wasn't, at least in her own eyes, which is a whole other layer to the whole thing. So yeah, those character relationships were really interesting, and the character dynamics and the power hierarchies of this story were very fascinating. This plot is interesting. I thought it was going to include some things from the myth that it didn't. I wasn't expecting most of the plot, to be honest. I can't remember what it actually covers on the back, or indeed on the inside. Yeah, so it's pitched as being about Penelope's choice of suitor and whether that will start or stop a war. Actually, much more happens than that does, and I understand why they've marketed that way, because that's the bit that people know, but it's much more about defending Ithaca from threats rather than about Penelope choosing a suitor. At least that was how I read it, and there's a lot more interplay between different Greek powers than I think I was potentially expecting, and much less about Odysseus, to be honest, other than as a legacy and the father of Telemachus, his son. And one other thing that I liked is that this plot didn't necessarily feel like it was super about motherhood, which was something I was concerned about, not because books about motherhood are bad, but just because it's not really my jam. And I think it was more that this book dealt with the idea of being a female heroic character who isn't charging off into battle, but who can charge off into battle. Like, there were lots of options available, and I enjoyed that. Overall, I think it's a very good plot. I enjoyed it. I wasn't expecting it to go where it went. Not that it goes into a particularly weird place, but it just wasn't quite what I was anticipating. I thought it was going to be much more focused on the suitors than it was. So then, I've said a lot of good things about this book. I genuinely did enjoy lots of it. I think it's a really interesting read. I didn't love it, and a lot of that's for very personal reasons, like I've said. I find with this kind of Greek mythology retelling, they tend to go like, we're finally telling the story of the women that we've forgotten about. Yeah, we're telling their story, and then it is just miserable. And in some ways, that is this book. Less so than in others I've read, like the spectrum is kind of like Circe's pretty solidly mixed, miserable to good. The silence of the girls was just awful, and this is kind of like here. It's not the worst, but I find I don't enjoy this kind of story, and I know you're not meant to, but I don't get that kind of cathartic reading experience that I think you should get from this kind of book. For me personally, just doesn't quite hit the mark. I don't know if it's just the tone or the combination of everything feeling miserable and then having to wade through more poetic prose. I don't get the highs and I just feel the lows, and that doesn't appeal to me. Rhymed a little bit there. I also think there was an element that I really wanted this to feel more triumphant than it was, and I think that's just kind of the problem of the story, is we know how it ends, we know where it goes. It's not a particularly triumphant story for the women of Ithaca, to be honest. And looking back on it, I can see those elements coming through. Overall, my main impression coming out of the book was like, great, tick that off. And not, ooh, can't wait to read that again, which I did have with Circe. I could see myself reading it again in the future. With Ithaca, I was kind of like, it was not as bad as other Greek mythology retellings I have read, and that's not a huge compliment. In terms of comparisons, in terms of other things you can read, I'm probably not the best person to recommend them, because my relationship with these Greek mythology retellings is not a positive one. Like, Circe is my favourite. That's what you should read. Go watch my review. I don't have anything that I can draw in that felt very, very similar. I'm trying to think. Women Left to Rule feels like something I should have a recommendation for, but I don't think that I do. I wonder, maybe an element of the Sword of Kaigen comes into this. The Sword of Kaigen is much more action-packed, much more broad in its scope, but there is a plot line of kind of acknowledging what you've given up and the struggles of kind of parenthood versus your own past experiences, but I don't want to spoil it. But yeah, that's the only one I can think of, and that's mainly because it's right here behind me. I can see an element of that in this, I think. Overall, do I recommend this? If you love this kind of thing, if that's for you, I think it is a good example of it. It is not my favourite thing, and I think it has some very interesting stuff in it, but I won't necessarily be rereading. Doesn't mean I didn't enjoy it. It was about a 3.75 for me. About averagely sat. But on the off chance that this audio is completely corrupted, I will just draw a line under this and we will keep going with our lives, I guess. Have you read this? Do you have plans to? Let me know down in the comments below. If you haven't already, please do subscribe. It makes me feel loved and appreciated. Nothing makes me feel more loved and appreciated than my patrons over on Patreon, who support the channel and get bonus content and access to videos early access to videos. There we go, that was it. If you'd like to join their number, that's all linked below, as is my Discord and my Twitter if you want to go have chill chats about books. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. It's gonna be some bloopers now. Let's start with an important question. Do you need to have an understanding of the Odyssey or of Greek mythology, mostly specifically the Odyssey, and possibly also... My laptop just died. No! You were charged. What happened? Well, we'll see how the audio on the camera came out.